What's good, y'all? Welcome back to the Onyx Report, Black Masculinist news for the day. Hope you guys are well. I've been out of it the last few days, taking care of my son. He's getting a little bit better. He's still been out of it. He's been pretty much knocked out for the last 3 or 4 days. Kind of feel like I might have picked up what he had. I'm not sure yet, but either way, I'm kind of under the impression that we're both pretty infectious. So, I figured I'd get one in before I go back in and give him some more medicine. I hope y'all are well. What's up, Hybrid Ninjas? Jay Cleveland, what's going on? Kay Williams, what's happening? Hope everybody's well. Like, share, subscribe, join, and donate if you will. Support the channel so we can kind of get this word out. I'm not going to take too long. He said he wanted to watch some animated Batman with me. Why'd he go and do that? And we can do that till he pass out. I'm good with it. So I'm enjoying that much. Mr. Calm, I appreciate that. Those well wishes. We will take that. Dr. Thunder, what's going on, man? Good to see you. Good to see you. I'm feeling a little drained, so I can kind of feel it. Something coming. Anyway, but I saw some stuff I wanted to get into, and shout out to O'Shea Duke Jackson. He kind of talked a little bit about in a recent video, and he does so many, you got to keep up. But recent video, he kind of talked about some of my opinions on tonight's subject, and I shared some of them on Facebook. So I figured I'd still nonetheless explain myself, not only in relation to Kevin Samuels, but to B. Simone and some of her recent statements about Martin Luther King, which I'll get into in a minute. But to back up a bit, I wrote my dissertation probably in 06, I think it was 06, 07. Keith, appreciate that support. Keith says, thank you for addressing this. We can't let this type of thing go unchecked or it becomes a narrative. Indeed, we got to put a word in. And I'm not always so great at that. I don't really follow headlines that well. But I'm learning to appreciate the opportunity to take it to a deeper level and get some other ideas on the table. So I'm slowly getting to it. Either way, I wrote my dissertation on a concept. See, the whole purpose of a dissertation is for you to create new knowledge. And this is a demonstration of a certain type of mastery of your field, in that you can produce new knowledge and have it be vetted by scholars, that you've trained with, you've worked under. That's what the whole dissertation defense is about. You're defending, this new production you have. And the idea that I created in my dissertation is something I call icon construction theory. And the basic idea of it, coming out of cultural studies, was that, people imbue certain iconic representations with meaning. But those meanings are complicated because they're envisioned and imbued by different groups. So if you take something, now my dissertation was formally about Asada Shakur. And that was because a mentor of mine, feminist mentor of mine, would only work on my committee if I did it on a woman, and nobody else had a problem with it. But I could have just as easily done it on Tupac, Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King, because to me, it wasn't as much about the person as it was about what people do with the person, how we construct meaning with people, even living people, right? But it becomes extremely interesting once somebody passes, right? I mean, we've all seen this, right? What a person means to us, not only to a society, but specific communities of people, right? They mean different things. They become symbols of different things. If you take Asada, to the right wing, she's a cop killer, right? To the revolutionary, she's a hero. To the feminists, she's also a hero, but she's a hero because she's a Black woman, right? To the revolutionaries, she's a hero because she fought the system. You know what I mean? Each community has a different vision of her. Now, she's alive, but socially, she's absent. So we don't get to hear her thoughts on any kind of regular basis. Now, when you take someone that has actually passed, then what they say tends to take a back seat to what people want them to mean, right? And this can be a heavy toll. This can take a heavy toll on someone. This can have a lot of impact. To get one of my committee members to serve on my dissertation. He was like, all right, well, what does this mean? He wanted me to just break it down. And I said, okay. So we were sitting at his house and he was watching Will Smith's Ali. And I said, okay, I've seen this movie. I said, do you remember the scene where Ali is running in Africa and the kids are running with him? And they're all having a good time and they're cheering him on until he runs up on a wall where he sees paintings of himself punching tanks and planes. And the kids are jumping all over him. And for the first time, the weight of what it means to be Muhammad Ali in these African kids and the community itself starts to hit him. The weight of it. I mean, for him, yes, there were things that he stood for publicly, coming out of the Nation of Islam and even afterwards, principles that he stood on, Black uplift, so on and so forth, fighting oppression, racism. He was also there trying to, feed his family and get his fighting career back on. I mean, this was the fight meant a number of things to him. But when he stops to see what his symbol, what his meaning is for people, there's a moment where he feels the total weight of that. And so this is what I was referring to in terms of icon construction, that it's not just about the person. And you can do this with any iconic figure. You can do it from I mean, really, I can name so many, it's ridiculous. It's become a feature, most particularly of Western culture, but it's I think to some extent a human feature. And so one of the things we're seeing is the fight over what Kevin Samuels means. And you have different communities that see him different ways. Right? Again, many feminists see him as a monster. Many masculinists see him as a hero. You got a bunch of other people that see him as all kinds of shades of gray and beyond. But one of the things I said in relation to Kevin Samuels was that when he passed, you're going to hear a lot of vitriol. And it's not going to take long before that vitriol goes way past Kevin Samuels and starts to get directed at you, Black man. And I said that on purpose because it's happened so often where you finally realize it was really never about Kevin. It was about what people's motivations were, and Kevin just became a proxy. He became a symbol of something. But I wanted to briefly, before I fully go there, I wanted to briefly kind of talk about something that leads up to it. Again, like, share, subscribe, join, and donate. I know it's a Friday night, but support the show if you will. If you can't send anything, make sure you at least hit the like button. All the methods to support the show are there. Y'all know what they are. But I wanted to talk about what I call the Kevin Samuels affect. Not effect, but the Kevin Samuels affect. What's left afterwards. And there are three things that I think Kevin kind of became symbolic for, especially amongst the brothers that I deal with. Right. And, one of those things had to do with, as I said, this kind of proxy idea. And here, and just real quick before I go further, let me show you. This is what I mean. Right. This is from Latour Billion. I don't know if Billion. I don't know how he pronounces that, but shout out to him. Makes an interesting statement on Twitter. So they had more smoke for Kevin Samuels than they do for Peyton Gendron or Gendron. I don't know how you pronounce the dude's name. Wrench Turner, appreciate that support. Thank you. Freddie Wayne, what's going on? Yeah, I know it's late. I figure some people might have to catch it later, but I wanted to get one in before the weekday was out completely. But yeah, more smoke for Kevin than they did Peyton. Isn't that interesting? You got somebody that talked for a couple of years on YouTube, and then you got somebody that literally rolled up and shot 10 people on camera. Who they got heat for. Right? This is what I mean by a proxy. Because it really isn't about Kevin. All of their ire is about Black men. But anyway, as far as the Kevin Samuels affect, there are at least three things that I noticed that he became symbolic of. And he changed the environment with that symbolism. These are not necessarily about the ideas he created. They're more about how he championed certain ideas and what that came to mean. And understand how that happens. it's not just about what's said, right? Because there are many of us saying different things that Kevin used, sometimes with acknowledgement, sometimes he just used it without it. It is what it is. And a lot of us do that on YouTube. It's almost impossible to actually credit everybody that you pull ideas from. It just is what it is. It happens in the academic world as well. Even though citations, there's supposed to be a big culture of that, but we're human beings. Ideas slide between us. It is what it is. But anyway, what he represented, it was everything from the presentation, right? Y'all see me, I'm in here in a t-shirt and a hat. I'm not sitting up in here in a suit. I don't have candles lit, candles going and, ambiance and all of that, right? That's not necessarily how I get down. That attracts a certain audience, right? The music he's playing attracts a certain audience, right? Who he's talking to, how he's talking, right? He's talking primarily to women. I talk primarily to men. All of these things, these differences that come about, right? All of that is part of the Kevin Samuels, framework. And so he pulled together a particular audience. Each one of us as YouTube creators, content creators, pull together a particular audience based on everything from our presentation to how we use what we say to how our show format. I don't generally pull people up, especially women, and have discussions with them. That's not my model. That's his. And that pulled together at a certain moment, right in the midst of the pandemic, where there were a number of things that made it a successful framework, right? He was in the right position at the right time to do it in a very particular way. And that said, it left an effect. So the first thing I noticed was that he became a symbol for sexual marketplace value, most particularly as it relates to Black male and female social value. I mean, if you're online, if you're in the manosphere, sexual marketplace value is hardly a Kevin Samuels concept. And it's hardly a concept alien to Black men. There's many of us that talk about it. He became a symbol for it. Those are two different things. He became a symbol for it because of the conflation of different things that came together to make his show popular, right? Was what it was. And in many respects, he symbolized something that, mainstream Black society did not really want to deal with. They didn't want to talk about sexual marketplace value whatsoever. The framework we were brought up under as Black men was that your job was to serve. You were to become this living embodiment of a list of things that made you worthy to date the average Black woman. From income to height to penis length to physicality to status to you name it. That list goes on and on. Your job was to become that for anybody. You might be shamed if a woman likes you and you don't like her. It's by other women. It's interesting. It wasn't so much a matter of who you wanted to deal with. It was a matter of who, women thought you should deal with, especially if a woman had already approached you. But that's a whole nother conversation. But the point I'm getting at, though, is he became the symbol for SMV, the discussion on SMV in the Black community. Because that was a discussion that many of us didn't want to have. I won't say us. Many folks did not want to have in the Black community. And he kicked the door in with it. And so now that left an impact where you have young men, most especially, who now understand sexual marketplace value and where they fit in it. See, my generation, we were never told when we were valuable. All we were told is to strive for this list. And what you found, if you were one of the 10% that made it to that list, is that didn't guarantee you shit. It just meant that you now had an opportunity. Kevin once talked about it on an interview I did with him. And he said, it just guaranteed you an interview. And that was a way I'd never heard it put before, but it very much fit. It guaranteed you an interview. That was about it. All of that striving, that achievement, all of that, an interview, right? So he became a symbol for SMV. And a very particular, and the shock of that SMV conversation really smacked a lot of people, left a lot of people butt hurt, because we practice it really as human beings, but acknowledging it was a whole different thing. So that's the first thing. Second thing is he kind of symbolized, how to challenge these set of expectations placed on Black men. So you didn't really have a movement of men responding to these high level expectations. We either tried to achieve it, you had a few people who just walked away from it, but there was no large scale pushback, and there was no narrative for how to address it, not even how to debate it. Some men naturally were talented and navigated it well. I would argue most didn't have a framework because we as a group never established one. Kevin kind of ended up spearheading that. And the last one was that he ended up kind of laying the framework, especially through SMV, for how different classes of men could articulate their point, not only in terms of establishing their own sense of value in the dating market, but verbally articulating it in conversation with women, individually and in media. You could actually, if you've never heard of SMV before, you could argue your value on blue collar terms. You could argue it on white collar terms. You could obviously argue it on celebrity terms, but he gave the language. He didn't create the language. He popularized it with his platform. He became, in many ways, a symbol of it. And it gave the language for men across class to be able to articulate their value. They began to understand the way age and status plays into it. And the problem, one of the backlashes of this is people, because he's a symbol for this, they make him responsible for it. But I keep having to remind people, Kevin didn't create high value. He always said it. There are people that are specifically responsible for creating the term, but more than the term, it was women that established that high value was what they were looking for. I grew up in the era where women articulated this outright in media and in person. They wanted nothing but six-figure men. I had never even heard that term, six-figure, in the 80s until I heard a woman say that's what I needed to have. I didn't even know what it meant. Right? Shout out to Sir Hale, showing support. Appreciate that. Blade Runner, what's going on? Right? Wrench Turner, appreciate that support. Right? So anyway, those are the three things that I think Kevin became, or what I call the Kevin Samuels affect. The after effect of his presence. Him being a face for SMV gave brothers a language that, again, he didn't create, but he popularized. And he had the right platform at the right time to become a jumping off point for those ideas to seep into everyday Black culture. It didn't happen prior to him in any major way. It is what it is, like it or hate it. He became the model for how to dialogue with women about it in a way we hadn't really seen. And he gave the language across class to brothers who could then articulate themselves in regard to this. Now, B. Simone, who I'm only recently becoming, familiar with. I guess she started some show called Know For Sure Pod or whatever. And she makes a statement. I guess she's trying to get attention, or whatever. But she has this little show she did, and she made some statements about Black men, most particularly through Martin Luther King. And I'll tell you how this connects to Kevin. So this is a conversation from the show, and you can hear yourself what she has to say.
What's more important, the fact that Martin Luther King is the man that fought for freedom, or the fact that he was cheating on his wife?
Jesus. I'm going to give you this example. He's a great father. He's a great businessman. He's a great CEO. He's an entrepreneur. He's such a boss.
He's a boss.
Look at that man. He's a boss. He's a great father. Look at him, that strong Black man.
Look at him being at his kid's game.
But you're cheating on your wife. You're not a good husband. But he's great in all these other aspects. How are you a great leader, a great CEO, a great Black man? You're not great. You're not great. God, you're not. That is triggering.
Yeah.
Sure. I'm a good dad. You're not a good dad because you don't respect me. How the fuck you showing these kids you a good father and you don't respect their mother? You're not a great dad, my nigga. You're an okay human.
Someone being a good person to you means they're a good person to you. Someone being a good person to everyone means that they are a good person.
Some of this shit gives me a headache, these bobbleheads. But anyway, so y'all heard it, right? Now here's the aspect of this that brought me to both Kevin and Dr. King. So they're talking about King, and B. Simone goes on this little tirade about King cheating on his wife, as you heard, right? And then somehow, I don't know if you caught this, it mystically became about her. And she's yelling at the camera about somebody not being a good dad to her kids, for her, things of that nature. Who's she talking about? Clearly, at this point, she done transitioned from Martin Luther King to black men, I would argue. But y'all tell me who you think she's talking to. I don't think she's talking to all men. I think she's talking to a man, most likely the man that she's dealt with in her various relationships. But I would argue that she's more than likely talking about black men. And this is something I said happened with Kevin when he passed. All the vitriol you heard, it wouldn't take long before it would transition into an argument between whoever's yelling at you about Kevin and their thoughts about you. Even if you've never been with her, you become the proxy for all her ire toward black men. And I think that's just what we witnessed with B. Simone. It became about her feelings about Kevin. This had nothing to do, or I should say her feelings about Martin Luther King via black men, but it's the same thing that happened with Kevin. These people are iconic. They become symbols. They become proxies for something else. And what we have to do is assess who exactly they're talking to. Because it's very quickly not a matter of it being about Kevin or Dr. King. Much of the time, especially in pop media and on Twitter, it's about black men. It's the misandry that we talked about, more specifically anti-black misandry, the hatred of black men. And Kevin and King and any other iconic black male you can think of become proxies for their rage, for their unmet expectations, for their dreams, for whatever it is they imagine black men failed them at. And ironically, that can happen even when you didn't. Even when you didn't, it can still happen. Because it never was about, the real situation. It wasn't about being honest about anything. It was about her frustration, her feelings, her emotions, which can defy logic, can defy reality simply because she feels them. And that's what B. Simone demonstrated. So regardless of the fact that Kevin becomes an entryway for a discussion that needs to be had in the black community, and it ain't about whether he did it perfect, whether you agree with everything he said, damn sure ain't about his tone, because I done told y'all before, I think tone is a bullshit deflection. The reality of it is the discussion needed to be had. It was 40 to 50 years too late, in my opinion, but we didn't have a social movement as black men in place to produce the context for the language we developed, the context for the talking points we developed, the worldview shift. We didn't have any of that in place. Kevin was a consequence of that. And truthfully, if it wasn't Kevin, it would be somebody else. And it will be somebody else at some point. But it was Kevin, and I'm not going to take that from him. He created the platform that propelled him into the mainstream enough for those discussions to be had, and for more importantly, for men, even young men, to learn the value of them in their own lives. And I think this is critical, because when I was 15 and I would hear these girls talking about six figures and all of this stuff, and I didn't even know what those concepts meant, there was nobody to stand for me and tell me how to break that down, how to explain it, how to argue against it, how to see myself in the midst of it, how to develop a perspective about whether I should give a fuck. Kevin did that for young men. Now, luckily at this time period, there are others that can do that as well. But when I was 15, we didn't have it. So at least I know that a generation of young men can now push back against this mess. And I'm telling you, as a 20 plus year teacher, I mean, I've been teaching since 98. So I'm at 24 years. 24 years of teaching. I've seen these discussions happen 1,000 times in classroom after classroom. And the same thing would happen. Black women would get louder and more outspoken, and really women in general, but most particularly black women, because I'm in Africana Studies. So the majority of females in my classes were black. And black men would become silent. This is what I mean when I say that we didn't have a language. Now, Kevin didn't create the language, but he popularized it. But I remember 20 plus years of us not having it. I remember black men sitting in the back of the classroom because they didn't know how to respond, not raising their hand, not even looking you in the eye, because they didn't have a response. as the girls in the class had been socially trained to make these arguments by their mothers and their grandmothers and their aunties. They had learned how to talk men down into a corner about how many expectations men failed. Most young men in particular would be silent. Older men wouldn't even be present. This was a discussion that was happening one way in the Black community for decades. This is why there's so many people that are entitled and butthurt because they're being challenged. It's not necessarily because they don't like what's being said. Of course they don't. But it's more that they've never had to hear it. They've known nothing but silence. They've known that they could say whatever they wanted and most black men would respond with nothing. And now they have to hear it. And not just from one guy. They actually have to hear it from multiple men, which is something that we experienced, but they never did. I don't care what part of the country you went in, where I taught, it didn't matter. The same talking points would come out of different women's mouths. Young, old, middle-aged, East Coast, West Coast, South, same thing. Same talking points would come out of each group. They never had to do that. The only thing they've noticed from us that was that universal was our silence as Black men. Now they're starting to see Black men sharing thoughts, comparing notes, coming to similar conclusions. Even when we disagree, we don't disagree as far apart as we used to. Now we at least share a particular terrain. We may disagree on fine points, but now we have arguments that ultimately stand for humanizing Black men. Francis, appreciate that support. Right? This is a different era. And so that said, they're now having to get used to a Black male voice, and it offends them to have to hear it. What offends them more than what you're saying is the fact that you have something to say and other men are saying the same thing. That's what offends them. But we've had to deal with that for decades, and this is new for them, right? So in that respect, iconic figures become a proxy, and I want you to be on the lookout for when people are filtering their perspectives through a given person. And what I want you to do is really ask yourself, who is this person talking to? Is this really about King? Is it really about Kevin? I bet you money it's really more about you, or you as another proxy for all Black men as well. She's talking through them, through iconic figures, to you, but she's actually talking at Black men and about Black men all at the same time. And it's so repetitive and constant. We've been hearing this most of our lives. Most of our lives. This is not new for us. So challenge it, raise questions, force them to think, right? Because here's the thing too. Even when B. Simone makes these statements, and shout out to the brothers on Facebook, they brought this to my attention. One of the things I had not really thought about was here. You find this piece. There's a couple I'm going to show you. This is, and they're going to be quick. I'm not going to be here long, but if you can check out NewYorkPost.com. This is dated January 15th, 2017. Coretta Scott King had a gut feeling MLK was loyal despite FBI findings, right? So what we've all heard was that, that King, cheated on his wife. The FBI had recorded him, sent tapes to her. But I had not really run across her responses to this. And so at one point, this article reads, some 100 pages later in her autobiography, she wrote a book on her life. She's recalling the autobiography of family friend Ralph Abernathy, in which he claimed the leading voice for nonviolence slapped one lover and then bedded another the night before his assassination in Memphis, Tennessee. Coretta tartly declared, scandal sells books, fidelity does not. Her husband was no saint, she contended, but his faults were confined to things like stepping out of his pajamas and leaving them on the floor. Right? In another piece you can find on Daily Mail, right? This too is dated January 15, 2017. Martin Luther King's wife was convinced he stayed faithful despite FBI smear tapes of him having sex with other women. Something that I think a lot of women now probably dismiss, because I've actually never heard one quote Coretta on this issue, but that's just me. Hold on. Let me see here. So here we go. It says right in the middle, Miss King addressed his supposed adultery in a series of interviews with her friend Dr. Barbara Reynolds, which are compiled in a book called My Life, My Love, My Legacy, which is out in the US Tuesday. In the book, Ms. King bluntly says, the question everybody wants to know is this: do I believe my husband was unfaithful? Mrs. King, who was married to her husband for 15 years until his death, told Miss Reynolds that scandal sells books, fidelity does not. And then she continues with, it continues with, Miss King said she believed her husband was no saint, but his faults were things like stepping out of his pajamas. So the same thing, from the same interview. Now, here's the thing. And, I go back to icon construction. I don't need King to be faithful for me to value his contribution. I don't. I don't think it makes any particular statement about black men if he is or he was. And I don't think it makes any statement about him as a negative thing if he had sex with someone else or not. I personally don't care. But people tend to base, their perspectives on that. Whatever. Do what you want. What I find interesting is that the woman herself said she didn't think it happened. She basically thought the FBI had smeared him on purpose. And strangely, I hear very few people talking about that angle of it. Or she herself didn't believe it. So I'll share the links for that in the description. I look forward to hearing what you guys think on it. But at the end of the day, all I want to tell you and all I want to leave you with on this subject is don't let people smear you through proxies. It's all a scam. It's an opportunity for people who already have misgivings about black men to try and justify them, right? Most particularly through an icon. Because notice how important it was for Kevin to have died broke, to have died with some chick he met that day. You notice how much investment they made in these kind of statements very early on. Very early on. It was imperative to certain groups of people that he die a disgrace to his own message, right? Somehow, right? Like somehow he's broke, he died alone. This was the subtext for how a certain population or a certain group of communities, if you will, had to frame him. Not entirely unlike King. And I'm not saying that Kevin was Martin Luther King. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is the smear tactics are similar. And they're similar because it's really about denigrating black men. And yet there's a counter argument for both. There's a counter argument that actually suggests that $4 million was left to Kevin's mother and daughter. There's a counter argument that says the woman that was at his house was actually a woman he was vetting to be something very serious. And this is coming from brothers that talk to him daily. There's a counter argument that suggested that he didn't die from some nefarious reason or because he was whatever. There's a number of rumors. I'm not even going to give him any power. All I'm saying to you is there's a counter argument for that. There's a counter argument for King. There's a counter argument for all of this. But none of those things are popular because it's far more valuable to the larger society that black men be the image created of us. We've seen it a million times. Michael Jackson, Cosby. We've seen it with political prisoners. We've seen it with lynch victims. We've seen this for generations. To the extent that an individual man may have committed certain acts, I'm not saying that it doesn't happen. What I am saying is none of that changes the fact that there's been a large-scale practice of denigrating black men that goes back centuries. Hell, even some of the earliest had to do with slave revolts. And the stifling of that information so that other plantations wouldn't get wind of it and it might spark another revolt. I mean, you can look at it in a number of different ways. It has nothing to do with guilt, innocence, nothing to do with who you like, who you don't like. I'm talking about we step out of each individual situation and look at it as a pattern. One of the things you see is that the denigrating of the black man has to happen, the downplaying of his value, and the bigging up of all these negative talking points. It's not even almost. It's a pattern that's more of a strategy than anything else. And it doesn't matter if they were worldwide celebrities, internet celebrities, or just somebody who was on their way up. It doesn't matter. It's the same story. It doesn't matter if those individual men contribute to it by being human and having faults, or whether they're completely innocent of the accusations. It doesn't matter. The same plan is enacted over and over again. And so if you are on the receiving end of these things as a Black male, just be prepared. Be prepared to raise questions. Ask yourself who this person is actually talking about. How much of it actually has to do with you or the subject at hand, and how much of it actually has to do with people trying to levy an opinion that denigrates Black men as a whole. So anyway, like I said, not gonna hold y'all too long tonight. I look forward to hearing your comments in the comment section, especially against this kind of bile that we see coming out of people like B. Simone, and there are far too many others. I'm gonna get into a few my next show. There's a few more I got to get to, but at the end of the day, just don't forget that we are always more than what's being told. This is one of the reasons I posted the short clip this morning, because a brother on Twitter actually had to send me the report about the Black male in Buffalo at the supermarket who actually saved some of his coworkers, hid them in a room, barricaded the door. He saved their lives. And the story, really, the whole purpose of that particular story in the news wasn't even about that, really. It was really about what the super chain or what the admin of the supermarket were going to do to get people back and help their employees. It was almost like a side story within a side story. But it hit me a different way, because right after it happened, and I knew it would, I started to see people on social media, most particularly some of these Black feminist talking heads on social media, and they were coming with the Black men don't protect rhetoric. And yet, the first thing I saw was a Black man who actually did shoot the shooter, and he gave his life doing so to protect those in the store. And apparently, just today, I ran into a second brother who sacrificed his life to save others. He didn't die. He wasn't injured, but he nonetheless took a risk and saved some of his coworkers. Those two men, I've not heard lauded and treated the way they deserve to be, alive and dead, as heroes. And this is what I want some of y'all to remember. Regardless of what people want to do with the narrative, let's look at the facts and find out what really happened on the ground. We find the stories that don't make it into the news, and even when they do, they're downplayed. Those two brothers were heroic in terms of actually trying to help. It is what it is. So y'all have a good one. Check y'all out later. Peace.